Good afternoon. Welcome. My name is Benjamin Gadan. I'm the director of the Latin America program.
Tardes, soy Benjamin Gadán, soy el director del programa latinoamericano en el Wilson Center. Quiero agradecer a todos los que se unen a nosotros en persona y los que están en línea para esta discusión. Tenemos al embajador Murillo de la Embajada de Colombia para este diálogo. Quiero agradecer a la Oficina de Latinoamericana, previamente conocida como LAC, a USAID por ser los patrocinadores de nuestra conversación del día de hoy y a mis colegas del Wilson Center. Estoy encantado con el enfoque de la discusión del día de hoy sobre protección ambiental y el papel de las comunidades locales. Colombia tiene una biodiversidad extraordinaria, las selvas de la Amazonía y otras áreas. Está comprometida con la conservación y la acción climática. El embajador Murillo fue ministro del Medio Ambiente y el presidente actual, Gustavo Petro, tiene en este momento una agenda del medio ambiente para combatir la sobrepesca en el Pacífico del Este y la dependencia en los combustibles fósiles y su exportación. En el Centro Wilson hemos organizado una serie de eventos con la agenda colombiana ambiental, incluyendo la pesca ilegal y todas las acciones junto con Panamá, Ecuador, Costa Rica. Sin embargo, en Colombia, como en otras partes de Latinoamérica, los programas ambientales exitosos requieren más que políticas correctas en las ciudades capitales. Dependen básicamente de la cooperación y el liderazgo de las comunidades locales, incluyendo las afro-colombianas, que han experimentado los hechos de que sus supervivencias y sus vidas se ven afectadas. De hecho, nos han demostrado las prácticas de conservación efectivas, incluyendo la conservación forestal, las acciones comunitarias y la preservación del conocimiento tradicional, incluyendo la sustentabilidad ambiental. Son estas comunidades como en el Valle de Cauca, Chocó, Nariño, quienes actúan como los embajadores de las maravillas naturales de Colombia. Y continuamos con los objetivos de protección ambientales nacionales e internacionales. Es, en el apoyo de estas comunidades, incluyendo las comunidades indígenas, es urgente. Incluso el impacto intenso de las legislaciones de la biodiversidad que previenen la deforestación. Tenemos a dos representantes de esas comunidades que son aliadas del embajador Murillo. Y le daré la palabra a nuestro amigo Rizzi, que es el director de nuestro programa ambiental y moderará la conversación el día de hoy. Gracias por estar con nosotros. Tenemos equipo de traducción simultáneo para aquellos que lo requieren. Varios de nuestros asistentes estarán hablando en español y ustedes escucharán la interpretación directamente al inglés o al español. Gracias por la agenda tanto en Colombia como en América Latina y por el apoyo a las comunidades para alcanzar este objetivo tan importante. Es un privilegio el moderar esta conversación y Benjamin ha visto el programa latinoamericano junto con USAID con todo el trabajo que se hace en este campo y tenemos a un intérprete que está trabajando y debo recordarme a mí y a los panelistas que hablen más lento para darle la oportunidad de interpretar. Tendremos los comentarios del panel, haremos una introducción y después tendremos sus comentarios y ustedes que están en línea pueden presentar sus preguntas en cualquier momento que lo deseen. Vamos a escuchar al embajador Murillo, es el embajador de Colombia ante los Estados Unidos. El embajador nació en Chocó y inició sus estudios sobre minería, ha participado en la academia y ha sido miembro y director de protección ambiental. El embajador Murillo se ha enfocado en las comunidades étnicas. Es un placer darle la bienvenida nuevamente, embajador Murillo, al Wilson Center. También tenemos a Lady Vernaza, que es una defensora de las comunidades marginadas de Colombia, es la representante legal de la Asociación de Chocó, y también escucharemos a Pedro José Velasco Tumiña de MISAC, de la región del Cauca, defensor de las personas de esta zona. Pero bueno, usted me tendrá que ayudar a pronunciar su apellido. Ellos encabezan las autoridades de los pueblos indígenas y han hecho esfuerzos para la recuperación de la memoria y de toda la zona que les rodea. Y también tendremos a nuestra asesora de adaptación que está en otra parte del edificio. Compartiremos la experiencia y el conocimiento y las políticas que se han implementado en esto. Embajador Murillo, tiene usted la palabra, por favor.
It's un placer. It's a pleasure to be here. And thank you, the Wilson Center, for this invitation.
Agradezco al Centro Wilson por esta invitación para hablar sobre los afrocolombianos en la región del Pacífico del Este y en la defensa del medio ambiente, al igual que el bienestar ambiental y la biodiversidad de Colombia, que es una discusión muy intensa. Gracias, Benjamin, por traer este tema a la posibilidad de discutir los temas de la intersección entre las minorías étnicas de Colombia y la agenda climática y ambiental. También estoy encantado de estar con Aña Cristina Villegas, con quienes hemos compartido un panel previamente sobre la minería ilegal en la costa del Pacífico, y también agradecerle a usted por lo que esto implica básicamente con relación a la seguridad. Permítanme decir que en Colombia vamos a llevar a cabo cambios significativos. Por primera vez en Colombia tenemos un presidente profundamente comprometido con la agenda climática y ambiental y en intersección con las minorías étnicas, incluyendo los grupos de base, no en el asiento trasero, sino en el asiento delantero, llevando la dirección.
Colombian women,
La
Francia,
vicepresidenta del país, que es una mujer afrodescendiente que tiene este compromiso en favor de la protección de nuestras comunidades y enfatizar las acciones. Adicionalmente a esto, es muy importante el ver cómo Colombia está profundizando en su democracia. Se habla mucho de esto en Washington, pero por primera vez en la última elección, muchos afrocolombianos de las comunidades indígenas hicieron una presencia masiva en las urnas para la elección del presidente Petro. Perdimos la elección de Sergio Fajardo, pero compartimos las propuestas en favor del cambio. Adicionalmente a esto, la democracia colombiana está muy comprometida, y lo digo porque las minorías étnicas luchan y avanzan su agenda, y cuando se profundiza la democracia, no hay otra manera de lograrlo. Aparte de esto, tenemos un liderazgo maduro en el gobierno y también en la oposición, que ha tenido la capacidad de hablar y llegar a un acuerdo. Y déjenme compartir un ejemplo. Aquí estoy compartiendo esto con Benjamin porque hay mucha mala información e información equivocada. El presidente Uribe, que es el líder de la oposición, para apoyar las negociaciones de paz con el FNL, y el partido de oposición está participando junto con el gobierno en el proceso de negociación, y además han logrado, y me tomo un minuto para hablar sobre esto, porque esto es relevante para nuestras comunidades, pero pudieron también llegar a un acuerdo Pero la oposición apoyó las negociaciones con distintos aspectos polivalentes, con representantes del partido de oposición, Centro Democrático. Estos en sí son indicadores de la salud que experimenta la democracia colombiana. Y es el momento de ver que la mala información viene básicamente de las discusiones que se tienen normalmente en la democracia, incluyendo puntos de vista diferentes. Esto es clave para las comunidades afrocolombianas en el Pacífico y en el movimiento de la agenda. Mi primer punto es que por primera vez en el Plan Nacional de Desarrollo, este está basado en la transformación que haga que la economía colombiana avance hacia una transición ambiental y socioecológica. Por lo tanto, estamos haciendo una zonificación a través de un ordenamiento territorial para efectos de la protección del agua. Esta es la agenda de las comunidades afrodescendientes. Tenemos muchos retos en Colombia y en el mundo. Estaremos viviendo una transición planetaria en el mundo. Hay muchos retos, la legislación de biodiversidad. Hay tantos retos con relación a la migración, etcétera. Pero estos retos en Colombia no podrían resolverse sin la presencia de las comunidades de color, las comunidades afrodescendentes. ¿Por qué? Primero que nada, las comunidades afrocolombianas en el Pacífico, y este es un caso importante a compartir, ellos son los propietarios colectivos de sus tierras ancestrales. El 50%, y se los digo, de los bosques naturales de Colombia son propiedad de estas comunidades de manera legal. Hay muchos líderes sociales, hay muchas discusiones, muchos miembros de las comunidades han perdido la vida, pero tienen una riqueza tremenda. Y sin tomar esto en consideración, no podemos resolver ninguno de los retos que tenemos, incluyendo la aplicación de las leyes de biodiversidad, las leyes antideforestación, y esto es la razón por la cual las comunidades deben de tener una voz y tomar parte en los procesos de toma de decisiones y también brindarles a estas comunidades las soluciones necesarias para desarrollarlas en conjunto con ellos y para ellos. Hay muchos ejemplos de éxito de esto. Cuando estuve como ministro del Medio Ambiente en la administración previa, había una serie de voluntarios en Cabo Michael para brindar la posibilidad de dirigir a estas comunidades los recursos para considerar lo que eran las emisiones de carbono. A partir de esto tenemos ya una protección bajo estos mecanismos de prácticamente todas las áreas del Pacífico. Esto es solamente un ejemplo. Me estoy tomando mucho tiempo, pero lo que quiero compartir es que la nueva frontera de soluciones ante la crisis climática, ante la crisis de la pérdida de biodiversidad, de la degradación de los ecosistemas, la crisis de migración, la crisis del narcotráfico y todas las políticas antinarcóticos y además la crisis de migración, todas tienen que ver con la forma de incluir y trabajar en conjunto con todas estas comunidades. Gracias por los cimientos de esta discusión. Ahora le vamos a dar la palabra a Ladi y a Pedro. Ladi, si pudiera ayudarnos a entender desde su perspectiva cómo los afrocolombianos están posicionados de manera tan única para ser los líderes en este espacio y cuáles son los éxitos que usted identifica en su propio trabajo.
Muchas gracias. Primero, buenas tardes para todos y todas. Qué gusto verlo, mi doctor. De verdad, muy feliz de mirarlo nuevamente y me conmovió con ese discurso. Muchísimas gracias. En cuanto al liderazgo de las comunidades negras afrocolombianas en la protección del medio ambiente, pues como lo dijo el doctor Murillo, nosotros a través de la diáspora, las comunidades se fueron asentando en unos territorios y en el 1993 se logró el proceso de tener una ley propia de las comunidades donde se reconocían esas tierras como parte de esas comunidades. Y ahí empezó todo un proceso de titulación colectiva, pero antes de ese proceso, nuestros abuelos siempre a nosotros nos metieron de que estábamos en un territorio rico, pero que tocaba conservar. Y para conservar había que vivir de manera amigable, algo que trajeron nuestros antepasados, pero que acá los hermanos indígenas también tenían como parte esencial, cuidar a la madre tierra, cuidar el aire, el agua y todo lo que se encuentra en ella. Eso se pasa de generación en generación y siempre la madre le dice al hijo, el padre le dice al hijo, el abuelo, el bisabuelo, y así se va pasando, que hay que cuidar. Que la tierra nos brinda, nos da, nos protege, nos da techo, comida y de todo, pero que nosotros tenemos que cuidarla también. ¿Por qué? Porque es la única casa que tenemos todos los seres humanos. Y más que tener recursos en el bolsillo, es tener aire que respirar y alimentos sanos que consumir. Entonces, esa es una tarea que se pasa y que antes de llegar a la titulación colectiva, nuestros ancestros y ancestras ya lo hacían. Y eso nos lo han ido pasando. En estos momentos, en el caso de nuestras comunidades.
In the case of our communities in the South Pacific and the communities that are located in Nariño, Tumaco, Francisco, Pizarro, Moseda, and all of these municipalities that are part of the Pacific shores, we come from a process of trying to preserve and safeguard our natural resources and mainly water. In order to keep water, we have to look after our trees and after our forests, and we have to share this with our children. In the field of education in our land, we have to take into account what we own. And I'm sorry for saying this, we are always told that, well, the revolution in France, but they are not telling, for example, the children that, well, this water source is the one that is supplying water to all of these areas. And some communities have to move because they have no availability of water. For us, the conservation of the spaces where we coexist is fundamental. Now that we're speaking about the environmental problem that the planet is undergoing, many of us are saying, this is what our grandparents were telling us, and they were right. You cut off a tree, you have to plant 2 or 3, because when a tree disappears, the full ecosystem changes. And it's like trying to understand this, but when you live within our territory, you realize that one thing is to be in a city, and I was laughing at those people that are walking and they look like robots and they just move around. But we live in a different environment. I have here Pedro with me, and we live differently than you live within the city. We hear, we listen to people carefully. I live in a community, and you look at those parrots flying by, you thank God for life. So for us, for all of us, to look after the environment is not to look after the tree. What I say is the only thing the planet needs to do is get rid of mankind, because we are the evil of the planet. So within this order, our community is not only thinking about how we can do the conservation of the environment, but we have to go beyond this, you know, from planting a tree, looking after the freshwater sources, having fresh air. And if you want to have a good life, well, go to the rural communities. In the urban areas, that's not healthy air. So we have to create all of these partnerships. In Acapa, we have the Kwekmak project. We are on our third grant with USAID. And it's been quite interesting because there was misinformation of how to see that the protection, and this was said by my great grandfather, and he would say, the air that you see here is going around the planet. And I said, you're crazy. What do you mean? But yes, everything you're doing here will either benefit or harm the whole planet. And that is what we should aim for. So what we are saying is we all must unite in favor of the protection of the environment. It's not only the environment. We have the rainforest, the trees, the water, the air. But we have this other area where we're harming the Mother Nature. Let us all be united. This is the grassroots communities, the institutions, international cooperation in order to have good outcomes. And it would not be just one acting on your own. We are now being united because, for example, we have some persons that are monitoring our forests, our communities. But at this point, we realize that there are other third persons, and this is where institutions play an important role, that are doing this not only in our territory, but they are harming us. So if we're talking about the environment in the production area, we have to be directly connecting productivity with the environmental areas. We're talking about what is productive, but let's say that we're relating or talking about energy. It has to be based on environmental policies. I will not mention anymore, but you can see that the ministries within the country are not fully articulated to carry out this conservation exercise. We talk about adaptation, but we're not adapting to everything that's happening. You have to go to the Pacific shores and see what is really happening. And the communities are the ones that are the most impacted. And you know, when we think about all of those resources, that movie that is called 2012, everyone says it's a terrible movie, but there's something good about this movie. They had a lot of money, but when the problem was faced, money was useless. Within a very good speech that I heard once, they were saying, all of this money, invested, but invested rightfully. Let us invest this money in what is the most important thing. What do we have as the most relevant thing? Life. If we have no life, there's nothing. So we have to protect our planet. The planet is given to us by planet Earth. But within the grassroots, we have to consider the people that are investing in deforestation, in mining. And I'm sorry, Dr. Murillo, mining, legal or illegal, is mining. We have to see how mining will not be so invasive, so negative. What can we do? So, I mean, you see at Quito, and and we see all these wounds that Chocó has it. That's what it looks like. That beautiful landscape is disappearing from what our communities are doing, what we're doing, in order to have better outcomes. These outcomes should be that we would all should be doing. We're not asking that the rich people would invest their resources, but the air that the rich people are breathing is the same air we're breathing here. With our Afro communities, our indigenous communities, the same air is giving us all of the trees and all of the environmental harm of all of the big companies. So let me insist, we have to review what is happening and to go down to the foundations. We're doing our effort. Ladis, what we want is we want to have ecological tourism for people to come to see our land.
Y decía, pero es que para poder atacar la problemática, primero es en casa.
In order to tackle all of these problems, we need to see all of the waste. I mean, we have no results unless you're involved and compromise with what you want to achieve. And we want to have a land that will last for so many more years, that I will pass away and my great-grandchildren will remain here with all of these conservation policies, and that all institutions will work hand in hand to improve the conditions. That is what is relevant. It's useless to have a lot of money and have others that are doing everything they can just to retain clean air and the forest, but they have no conditions to do so. And there are other problems. There are multinationals that are, uh, uh, because what they're interested is in cutting wood that they're going to be selling at good prices. And well, something that was just mentioned by Dr. Murillo, we have a lot of leaders, and many of our leaders have lost their lives in defending their environment. Many of them have lost their lives because they say that they do not agree with the fact of having a multinational come over and break everything and change things. And there is no protection for environmental defenders. So for us, it is very important to remain within our land, to have the right conditions, to keep on maintaining our forests and keeping them safe, and to be there. And well, I will be there. And if I'm going to be losing my life, well, I'll be there. But it's important that the policies in Colombia will be aiming to the fact of keeping at all moments the protection of the Amazonian, but also the Pacific shores are very relevant. I live by a beach, and we have relocated about 5 times because the tides are going up. I mean, we used to be above sea level, we're now under sea level. What is happening? The sea levels are increasing because the poles are melting. So we have to become fully aware of this. We will remain within our territories, we'll remain our struggle, but we all need to sit around the table and review and rethink this is the right pathway in order to stay and remain here.
Thank you, Ladi, for those amazing remarks. I think, in addition to
Gracias.
Maria's point about centering Indigenous and Afro-Colombian perspectives, I think your point about centering environmental considerations in our decision-making is a really important and valuable point. And I'm going to try not to think of myself as a robot every time I'm walking around DC, but I see your point about this sort of disconnect between our human and environmental systems and the sort of the transformational change that's necessary to reconnect those systems in a way that yields a much more sustainable and prosperous future. Thank you very much. Pedro, we're going to turn to you now. If you could tell us about your work in the Misak community and where you see opportunities for more meaningful engagement with Indigenous perspectives and contribution.
Buenos días.
Good day. I'm so pleased to greet USAID and the Wilson Center and the people in Colombia and the United States of America, distinguished Ambassador Murillo, and my colleagues here in Colombia, and the coordinator of human rights in Colombia. As indigenous people, we believe the most fortunate ethnic populations in terms of living within the strategic ecosystems of mountain and rainforests that are the most important ones in Latin America and in the world. The ethnic population groups considered in population terms, though we are only 4% of the Colombian population, we have lived historically protecting our mountains, our rainforests, and our shores for generations. And all governments have not had the ability to understand the political dimension, but also the strategic dimension and the promotion that historically the indigenous people have taken in regards to the protection of the environment, life, and the different ecosystems that we have around us. Within all of this, unfortunately, the ethnic people and indigenous people, we have been facing many problems in Colombia: narco trafficking, the armed conflict, the land ownership problem, uh, poverty that has also come to our territories. These are the structural areas that are part of our consideration in our indigenous peoples, that through our grassroots communities, we have tried through all the public policies and administrations that the different administrations have had to be able to have advocacy and establish this guideline that the governments have in relation to our environment and our land. As indigenous people, we have said that the protection of life in our territories and the environment are closely related. They cannot be separated ever. So that is why, as indigenous peoples, we have a common goal, which is the defense of our territories in the framework of our ethnic life guarding plans. As indigenous peoples, we have been carrying out advocacy actions with recent administrations, with environmental areas, and the policies for the defense of our territories within the framework of what recently has been mentioned in the peace process, in the framework of the defense of life of indigenous people through life plans, but also reestablishing and sharing and outlining what is truly happening within our territories. It is true, all of the impacts in the reforestation, mining, the guerrilla, and the narco trafficking are not situations created by indigenous people. They are situations created by the government itself, by private economy entities, but in a way also by international market participation regarding the land market in Colombia and regarding forest exploitation projects and policy in the legal and illegal mining, but also through the international policy of the narco trafficking market. These are the situations that have been present in our indigenous territories. We have become an umbrella where armed groups and narco trafficking and illegal groups are there, are hiding from the Colombian institutionality and legality. We, since we live within the most of our territories in Colombia, that is where we have to endure on a daily basis a conflict with the environment, with our land, but more so the way to survive as environmental defenders with all of the processes that we have within our territories. Now, all of our processes need to have the protection and the strategy of environmental protection in place, and they must become, one way or another, a part of the international agenda of national and international advocacy, where our territories will not just be considered expectation territories or folklore territories, but areas that we have historically safeguarded, where our motherland is providing clean air, fresh water, clean water, and all of the diversity that has managed to live given the different situations that we have seen created by international market, by the governments that have tried to capitalize all of the indigenous territories in Colombia. So through this, I make a call and to reflect among this area in these areas in Colombia, and also everything that is directly related with life and the environment and the protection of the natural resources. But if we are not listening to the community, we cannot move forward our processes that will defend our national sovereignty or our regional sovereignty and the protection of the peoples that have lived within these territories, which are the Afro-Colombian and indigenous people. And if we will survive, the investment has to be reflected and taken in the government decisions between ourselves and you. And well, let me say to Dr. Murillo, USAID, and Wilson Center, this promotion is now being worked with, and all of these leaderships is an area where we're reflecting about everything that is happening within the indigenous territories, given all these endless situations and the ones that we face as the ethnic population groups.
Thank you so much, Pedro. I think I want to come back to a couple of the points that you made in the discussion, but some really interesting and important pieces about sort of the broader sort of structures in society that actually this is a point that you made in a piece, Ambassador Murillo, that you wrote for the International Journal on Human Rights. You drew connections between the structural racism and historical exclusion experienced by Afro-Colombian people and the disproportionate impacts that they are experiencing today. And in your piece, you were talking about sort of the climate change context, right, of the disproportionate impacts, but we also see it in sort of the narco trafficking and the armed conflict and how they're pulled into that because of these historical exclusions and structural imbalances. So I think it would be great to come back to that in the discussion. But first, Ana Cristina, please give us USAID's perspective. I know there's been a lot of evolution in the agency about how we engage with local communities. It'd be great to hear what you're working on.
Thank you. And thank you, Benjamin and Lauren, for listening to the conversation and bringing together such an amazing group of people and are protecting and helping to protect the diversity of Colombia. So much courage. It is our honor to be here with these panelists, and I just want to talk a little about USAID work. And as you know, USAID has spent decades in Colombia working for the protection of the environment, but also contributing to the peace and the governance. USAID supported the transition from war to peace and to strengthen the democratic institutions and help to promote a more prosperous and inclusive Colombia. We know that none of the work to advance peace and conservation and rural development can happen without locally led biodiversity conservation and climate change action, and those are many times led by the Indigenous and Afro-Colombian communities, and we have to also interpret from the Pacific Coast. The architects of the agreement knew that there is no peace without inclusion, and that is reflected in the ethic chapter of the peace agreement. Covers the importance of guaranteeing the right of the communities to protect the environment. So those two are completely. Unfortunately, we also know that the work of protecting the planet and the environment is at a cost, and that comes in explosion, in violence, physical attacks directly to the life of those environmental defenders. So Colombia, we know, is in the top of the 5 top countries with the most attack to environmental defenders. And these leaders which are speaking against mining, coca production, environmental degradation, and protection. according to one of USAID partners, the Foundation para la Conservación y el Desarrollo Sostenible, assassination of park rangers are also growing in Colombia. Big parks in the Amazon where there are no park rangers because their lives are threatened. So it is affecting as well the capacity of protecting those environments and parks. And as compared to
Could someone ask the lady to get closer to the microphone so we can hear her? I'm sorry, the interpreter is having problems in listening to her.
Afro-descendants in particular, few of the most registered causes of violence against Afro-Colombians in the Pacific regions are land disputes, illicit job substitutions, and land restitution. The majority of the killings, the assaults in the Pacific region of municipalities with significant narco trafficking into Macro and Interior Caribbean, Carmen del Darien, and Rio Sucio in Chocó. So there is
Could someone help me? This is the interpreter. Could someone get the microphone closer to the speaker, please?
USAID has been working on this for a very long time on these problems, and every year our Colombian mission holds a series of human rights consultations with civil society and environment. We were talking about that again, that the environment and human rights in rural areas are completely overlapping and are very important, and they work together. So some of the key recommendations that came from that discussion.
Sí. Disculpa, es que no.
I'm sorry, we cannot hear the interpretation. The speaker is not close to the microphone. We cannot hear what she's saying. For interpretation purposes, we cannot hear her. And please speak to the microphone. We cannot hear you.
Okay, let's pause for a minute. Angus, can you go?
Que por favor hable directo al micrófono.
Can you hear me? Is that better? No?
I don't know if it's on their side or our side. Just 1 second.
But it's on your side. It's on your side. She has to speak directly to the microphone, please.
I'm not hearing the interpreter.
This is the English. In the English channel, can you hear me?
Ahora sí parece que ya.
Mil disculpas. ¿Ahora me escuchas mejor?
Now you can hear me, okay? Yes. Yes, we can hear you, but please speak directly to the microphone so the interpretation can follow you. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, gracias. So I'm going to go back. What I was talking is how the Colombian mission is working on these issues, and how the mission holds annual consultation, human rights consultations, and how it has been identifying those consultations, the importance of having both human rights and environment, and how they are interlinked. And some of the key recommendations that have come from those consultations are the need to recognize the respect of human rights as a foundation for rural development, understanding that the meaning of land and territory is very different for the different populations. So Afro-Colombians, Indigenous, peasants, they have a different understanding, and that is going to affect rural development. How it's important to promote rural development that is respectful of the environment, and we heard from our colleagues in Colombia that make that point, that is very important. You cannot have development that is not environmentally responsible and have peace. For USAID, these are not only recommendations, they are really the values that guide the work that we do. And USAID is especially committed to the protection of environmental leaders from intimidation and violence from armed groups, and also understand that there has to be support to alternative economic opportunities for those that are forced to engage in illicit activities. And some of the programs that we have been, like BioRed and Oro Legal, have worked on that way. We also are now engaging in more directly on supporting environmental defenders directly. And some of those examples are in the Amazon, where there is a training of environmental leaders with the expectation that they will form some support network of environmental leaders so that they don't work alone, but they have this support. We also work with the Attorney General Office to advance prosecutions of threats and also homicides against human rights defenders. With the Ministry of Environment, there is work to support this Escazú agreement, which one of the central axes of the Escazú agreement is the protection of environmental leaders, and to make sure, as it was mentioned before, that they supported the important inclusion of these communities in the decision-making process related to environmental justice. Last, USAID also support the rural reform. We are talking about how important is land and the use of land as restitutions, issues of land grabbing. So USAID is working in efforts to distribute land titles to farmers that never had them.
Títulos de propiedad para los agricultores, y estamos comprometidos profundamente con muchos de los programas con los afrodescendentes en la conservación forestal.
So let me just mention a few more things to close. So just thanking for the opportunity to be able to be here and share some of the work that we do, and that it is very important for us, and we are very proud.
Importante para nosotros, y bueno, estamos agradecidos con el apoyo de USAID en Colombia, y hemos sido un socio que ya tiene mucho tiempo y comprendemos las necesidades, y tenemos toda la admiración por todos los esfuerzos que usted ha llevado a cabo en el territorio, ante incluso el riesgo de su vida y de sus seres amados también, y realmente son las voces que se están elevando en la defensa de la naturaleza, y que nos piden que nos detengamos y que pensamos en la importancia del trabajo ambiental y climático, y que podamos con ello responder a estos llamados tan importantes para la protección del medio ambiente. Sabemos que hay mucho más trabajo por hacer. USAID está trabajando en muchos distintos frentes sobre la localización, muy de cerca con aquellos que trabajan en los territorios, la emisión de políticas. Hay una necesidad de involucrar a aquellos que trabajan en el territorio, en la toma de decisiones, y como nuestros aliados. Así es que muchas gracias por su invitación a estar presente aquí. Nos quedan únicamente 10 minutos y tengo una serie de preguntas en línea, y yo tengo varias y estoy seguro que hay otras. Voy a hacer una primera pregunta rápidamente y abriré el piso para las preguntas que recibimos. Perdón, esta es una gran pregunta y la haré con este tiempo tan limitado. Y por favor, Ladi y Pedro, incorpórense con sus comentarios. Con la violencia estructural, el círculo de exclusión, y a dónde nos encontramos en este momento sobre este creciente conocimiento y conciencia de la necesidad de incorporar y proteger la identidad de los defensores ambientales. Y uno de los retos que estamos enfrentando es que los sistemas de toma de decisiones se desarrollaron con la exclusión de los pueblos indígenas. Tenemos los sistemas que no se construyeron con el concepto de inclusión en mente. Mi pregunta es, ¿dónde ven oportunidades para restablecer los procesos que tenemos actualmente de tal manera que sean mucho más prácticos, más flexibles, y que involucren significativamente a las comunidades locales, afrocolombianas, afrodescendentes, y dónde ven ustedes una posición en estos procesos a nivel estatal, a nivel eh, del trabajo de campo. ¿Qué podría decir?
En el tema de política de drogas, por ejemplo. En este momento,
Topic of narcotics. At this moment, our decision-making system, and not in the Colombian case. In the Colombian case, there is a lot of innovation. For example, in the drugs policy, used to be a policy that everyone speaks that a reform needs to take place. So the government to incorporate a drug policy where even some are saying, well, that is only a drug policy because the highlight has to do with the social development. So we say, well, they have not understood what we're saying. That this was mentioned by a high government official. That is the agenda of the Afro-descendant communities. And they say, well, they're within the government. And now the other point is more innovation. One of the challenges of Latin America is inequality. If we create an important institutional structure to fight against inequality in Colombia, we have the USAID policy. We hear voices in Washington. Resources should not be directed to Colombia. So it is the agenda of these communities represented by Pedro, but Ladia, because what you were saying, Ladia, a moment ago, and she was mentioning, you're like robots in the cities. And this has to do with different visions, and that is the vision that the government has nowadays. And the other point is there is a tremendous opportunity in education. Science and technology is now being improved. We're going with a NASA manager from to Colombia to see if we can get changes. I think that no one has been able to understand what is happening in Colombia. And they're saying, well, you're going back to the 90s. Well, we didn't have fracking then. We don't want to go back to the 90s. On the contrary, this is part of the Cold War way of thinking, and that is analyzing Colombia with the tools used in the 70s. Latin America has changed, Colombia is changing, and I think that we have now the opportunity of supporting different policies to take advantage of this new model built on a very solid relationship that we have with the United States, where the Afro-descendants, with the citizens' public diplomacy, even against the government, have opened up a space in this city to place these topics on the agenda. That is what needs to be considered. And I'm saying this out loud because I know you understand this. We know you're convinced of this, but this is a message for the country because the situation that is taking place within the country sometimes is seen differently. And we need that these levels of trust will go up. What is happening in Colombia is rather new, and it does pick these topics that you're talking about, a comprehensive agenda. You cannot solve security problems unless you include different variables of people's participation. And others are saying, you're not eradicating cocaine sufficiently. That is not the main indicator of our public policy. It seems that we haven't found ways of speaking about the topic with common elements upon which we can have a foundation of evidence to act. What we're looking at here is that the decision makers, as you have rightfully expressed, did not really know what the agenda was.
Thank you, Ambassador. Laddie and Pedro, would you either of you like to weigh in on that question? About how different decision-making bodies, whether they're within Colombia, the government of Colombia, regionally all the way to international can operate more effectively in their engagement with environmental defenders and local communities.
Pues es más como sugerencia en el
Well,
tema
as a suggestion in regards to the analysis that historically has been done regarding environmental defenders, and basically the ones here in Colombia. In Colombia, we have the highest index of murders in Latin America and the world of social leaders. And most of them have to do with women and leaderships that have been involved with the climate actions within their own territories. This is the peak of the iceberg to start working our advocacy in terms of public policy, of international policies and participation, but also how these leaders, without losing their lives, they could carry out their agendas from their own territories, their own land. It's impossible to speak about your own land and to do any agendas and carry them out when they're being displaced, given the presence of armed organizations and drug traffickers that are in our land. So that's why it is a historic emergency that the territories, the indigenous territories, will be protected, and environmental defenders will be protected, but taking them out of their area is harming their territories, because those leaders get their memoir, their wealth of knowledge and their understanding living in their territories, and we need to have them when they have been displaced, given the internal war, the narco trafficking, or illegal actions that are breaking down our collective territories, but also this collective awareness of the protection for our communities and for our environment. As it was mentioned by Taita Pedro, and as it was expressed by an American leader, I have a dream, and my dream is to have a healthy land, living in peace with uh, peace for our communities. But the national governments and all of the institutions have to sit down around the table. And I cannot take any decisions regarding Bogota if I've never been to Bogota. And I totally agree with my colleague here, because decisions are being taken when we talk about environmental issues, and we have countries that are highly committed. But this commitment is funny because, I mean, they say this and that environmental, but it's only a name, but the reality is quite different. So we need healthy territories where we can live in, because that's where we will be carrying out the conservation and the construction to move forward. What is important is we have a young generation, and they are being disconnected from their roots, and that's not good for us. What Pedro has expressed is very important. If our communities are left without people, where is all this population going to be moving to? And well, that means problems for Bogota, Cali, Medellin, but for all of us with all these processes, we lose culture, traditions, the relevance that these territories have in order to maintain our ecological balance. That's why indigenous communities, we speak about the fact that those are the people that have been for generations within this land. They have a whole history behind them that is good for Colombia. I mean, that's why we're here. And when we're talking about our Afro-descendant Colombian communities, we're talking about our cultures, and that makes us different. But we meet in this difference that creates the wealth of this country. That's why it is very important to have healthy territories so people will remain living in their land in the conservation, but we will retain this culture, and all of these elements will be present here.
Thank you both. I think really important points about starting with the protection of the indigenous territories. Thank you. And Ana Cristina, weigh in.
Gracias, Loren. Tal vez voy a adicionar algo pequeño, sé que no tenemos mucho tiempo, pero dentro de esa
I know
idea,
we don't have much time, but well, I understand that the work that we're doing at the level of human rights and environmental rights must be worked locally and with local people. You were mentioning a moment ago that there are some of these structural limitations of how we develop part of the elements of support and how we provide them economic grants. There are also structural limitations of how to bring this to the local sphere. And I believe that the recognition is really important here in order to have a greater impact. And this is considering this new effort from the USAID localization effort to work at the local level. And it's very difficult in certain cases, but it's critical. And I believe that it recognizes that very important role of working from the local sphere. And we wish a change that will have a great impact and for it to be permanent, that it will not just a 5-year investment, but a long-term investment, because we're doing them where this is really rendering fruits.
Thank you. Okay, so I realize we are at time. Ambassador, do you have time for one more question from the audience?
Oh, sí.
Okay.
Claro. No.
Okay, thank you. So we have some questions that have come on online. What I'm going to do is take those and email them to the participants and see if we might be able to get some responses written in response to those. But why don't we take one question from the audience? So whoever has a burning question that is relevant to all of our speakers, please, sir. If you could, yeah, thank you, Angus. And if you could let us know your name and if you have an affiliation.
Yes, thank you. My name is Alejandro Lara. Was born in Colombia and I grew up here in the country. Actually, I have two things quickly. My view is that we have a problem here. We have a problem of educating individuals on both sides of the aisle, or maybe I better say on both sides of the ocean, because we need to educate individuals here in the developed world, and we need to educate individuals on the ground. So it's about educating at all levels of society, children, youth, adults, and government officials. Now that leads to my second question, what you just mentioned, long-term investments. Long-term investments are very difficult. Why? Because there is a political will and a political process that every 4 years or 5, there is a new government. So it's kind of like erase and start all over again, and it continues spinning like a vicious circle. So we need to bulletproof any process thinking long-term that is sustained. Thank you.
Thank you. So is the question then, how can we ensure some, consistency? Okay. Okay, thank you. Who would like to take that question?
La voluntad política está, es nuestra agenda. Yo creo que en términos prácticos,
Political will is our agenda. In practical terms, we have several mechanisms that we can promote from the bilateral relationship, more so to move forward in environmental justice, peace, that Ladia and Pedro were mentioning. And of course, this has to do with mechanisms that are already in place. For example, that peace could be implemented within these territories with a commitment of both governments, that the United States will be sponsoring the agreement with the FARC. So we should channel agreements, which is where you are educating both parties. The other element has to do with payment per environmental services, which is connected with the anti-narcotic policies and transformation opportunities that have been already mentioned. There is a Republican senator in Michigan that was saying, I like this idea of paying per environmental services to communities that are eradicating cocaine crops. And well, that is already happening through the carbon markets. Communities are eradicating all these crops because they're receiving carbon certificates from the private sector. So there is a concrete possibility here because we need to give opportunities to the communities. And the other thing has to do with the action plan for the ethnical and racial equality that was signed in the year 2000. And this has not been considered. There are important opportunities of getting this opportunity and these activity operating, but we need concrete tools to do so.
Thank you, Ambassador. Any final thoughts, Ana Cristina, Daria, or Pedro, before we close?
Hágale. Sí, claro.
Of course.
No, pues más, creo que estamos en
I
una
really believe that we are at the propitious time to think and consider that the climate actions in favor of our motherland and the environmental defenders and protectors, not because we have a progressive government in place, but because we are at a time and immersed in a crisis where mankind is reconsidering its reconnecting with nature. So I believe that international cooperation, governments, and ourselves within our territories, we will be quite ready to keep on involving ourselves within this international agenda to think about our land and to show them, and that the collective life plans will be also an agenda for the world, and in this given case, that international advocacy will carry out permanent actions. Let me say something brief. I believe that the work that has been done and the partnership of Colombia and the United States is a good example of the continuous work that goes beyond political benefits. It is the constant, and it has to do with a commitment from the USAID, but also how the outcome has been so positive. I think that a good job has been done on both sides, and we have had good collaboration. I think this is an example of how we can go beyond those 5-year cycles, how we can work hand in hand in a long-term basis.
Thank you all. I think this has been a really wonderful conversation. We could have easily gone another hour. Thank you to our environmental defenders for joining us today. We hope to see you in person next time. Ana Cristina and Ambassador, thank you so much for your time this afternoon.
Thank you.
And thank you all for tuning in and for being here with us in person. Well, yeah, see you next time.